There is a valley outside Bergen, Norway, where fog collects between the mountains like something trying not to be seen. The locals have always had a name for it: Isdalen, the Ice Valley. It is the kind of place where sound disappears, where the path narrows and the trees lean inward, and where, on a grey Sunday morning in November 1970, a man and his 2 young daughters were hiking when one of them smelled something wrong. She stepped off the trail. Among the rocks, half hidden by the terrain as though placed there deliberately, lay a human body, burned. The front of the face, the chest, the arms, reduced to something that no longer resembled a person. The blackened hands were curled upward. The posture suggested defense, or agony, or both. They ran, and within hours, Bergen police were standing over what would become the most haunting, most obsessive, most unresolved mystery in Norwegian criminal history. A case that would consume investigators, outlive them, travel across decades, and still, more than 50 years later, refuse to give a single definitive answer. She had no name. She had no past. She had no one coming to claim her. And the deeper they looked, the more certain they became that someone, somewhere, wanted it to stay exactly that way. Bergen, Norway, 1970. The second largest city in the country, pressed between 7 mountains and the sea. A city of rain and fishing boats and old Hanseatic architecture along the wharf. A place of great physical beauty and, in that particular year, a place sitting quietly at the edge of something enormous. It was the Cold War. The world had been divided into 2 systems that each believed they could survive only if the other collapsed. Espionage was not a genre. It was a profession. Intelligence networks had burrowed into every corner of Western Europe, into governments, into hotels, into ordinary lives. Norway, though it may not have seemed like the center of anything, was not neutral ground. It was a NATO member. It shared a border with the Soviet Union, and in the waters off its coast, Soviet submarines moved with a regularity that Norwegian naval intelligence tracked obsessively. The country was quietly, steadily important, and people who dealt in secrets knew it. On November 29, 1970, investigators arrived at a remote stretch of the Isdalen Valley, in the foothills of Mount Ulriken. The scene was disturbing not only for its violence, but for what it did not contain. There was no identification, no wallet, no passport, no name written anywhere. There was a watch, 2 earrings, a ring, an umbrella, rubber boots, a scarf, some bottles, a partial bottle of liqueur, and beneath the burned body, in the rocks, traces of petrol. Around the body, remnants of burned paper. The items were strange in their own right. But what made every detective at that scene uneasy, what made this immediately and unmistakably different from an ordinary death, was what had been done to everything left behind. Every label on every piece of clothing had been removed. Every identifying mark on every object had been scraped away. Even the bottles had been stripped of their labels. It was systematic. It was thorough. And it had clearly been done before the fire. Whoever this woman was, she had been traveling as a ghost, or someone had tried very hard to turn her into one. 3 days after the discovery, investigators received a lead that broke the case open, not toward answers, but toward a depth of mystery that would swallow the entire investigation. In a left luggage locker at Bergen railway station, 2 suitcases were found that had not been collected after the rental period expired. A partial fingerprint on a pair of sunglasses inside matched the fingerprints taken from the body in the valley. The suitcases belonged to her. Police opened them and found a world that had been carefully, methodically constructed to mean nothing and lead nowhere. There were wigs. Multiple wigs. There were non-prescription glasses. Glasses with clear lenses, designed not to correct vision but to change in appearance. There were multiple currencies: Norwegian kroner, Deutschemarks hidden inside the lining of the suitcase itself, Belgian coins, British coins, Swiss coins. Clothing, again with every label removed. A tube of eczema cream with the prescribing physician's name scraped off. A silver spoon with the monogram filed away. Maps and travel timetables covering much of Western Europe. And a notepad. The top page of the notepad contained handwritten codes, columns of capital letters and numbers in a specific sequence that investigators immediately recognized as deliberate. Not shorthand, not personal notation. Something encoded. Something that had been written to be understood only by whoever wrote it, or by whoever it was written for. Bergen's chief of criminal investigation, Oscar Hordens, later recalled the moment those suitcases were examined. His son, Knut Hordens, now a doctor in Bergen, remembers his father coming home changed by the case. "I was 11 years old," Knut told investigators decades later. "I could tell this was something different, something that would stay with him." The codes were eventually partially deciphered. They corresponded to dates and place names, a travel log, encrypted. What they revealed was staggering. In the months before her death, the Isdal Woman had traveled across Norway twice, once in spring, once beginning in late October. She had stayed in Oslo, Trondheim, Stavanger, and Bergen. She had traveled through Switzerland. On April 1st, 1970, she purchased a train ticket in Bergen to Basel, and every single time, she used a different name. The aliases were traced through hotel registration cards, which in 1970 guests were required to fill out by hand. Bergen police distributed a composite sketch to hotels across the country. The responses came back one by one, each one deepening the portrait of a woman who had passed through Norway like smoke, visible in the moment, gone without trace. She used at least 8 confirmed identities. Genevieve Lancia, Claudia Tielt, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia Zahn Merches, Vera Jarl, Fenella Lork, Elizabeth Lienhauer. Different names, different hotels, different cities. Hotel staff who remembered her described someone memorable, elegant, well-dressed, dark-haired, with a composed and distant bearing. Some described her as beautiful. Others remembered her as nervous. Several recalled that she requested room changes more than once, as though unsatisfied with her sight lines or worried about being observed. At Bergen's Hotel Neptune, a 21-year-old dining room attendant named Alfhild Rains served her. Decades later, Rains told NRK journalists that she had never forgotten the woman. "There was something about her," she said. "You noticed her." What investigators also noticed, and what witnesses confirmed in retrospect, was a behavior pattern that went far beyond mere eccentricity. She paid for everything in cash. She reportedly wiped surfaces after eating. She spoke fluent French, German, English, and some Flemish, switching languages with a kind of ease that does not come from school. She was not a tourist. She was not a wanderer. She was moving with purpose. She was watching, and being careful not to be watched. And then one of the most specific and disturbing accounts emerged. A hotel maid in Bergen reportedly overheard the woman speaking on the telephone in German, saying, in a phrase that lodged itself in the case files, "I am coming soon." She never arrived wherever she was going. The autopsy was conducted at the Gades Institute in Bergen. What it revealed was the kind of detail that makes a case impossible to close neatly. The woman was estimated to be between 25 and 40 years old, though later forensic analysis would revise this upward, suggesting she was closer to 40 than 30. She was approximately 164 centimeters tall. She had dark brown hair, though investigators had already determined she wore wigs regularly, making this detail uncertain. She had never been pregnant, and had never given birth. She had not been ill. She had no healed surgical scars that could be used for identification. The toxicology report, which arrived in early January 1971, revealed that she had ingested a large quantity of phenomal sleeping pills, phenobarbital tablets. Forensic experts determined that she had taken somewhere between 50 and 70 pills, likely in 2 or 3 separate doses, with the first dose taken several hours before her death. 12 tablets remained undigested in her stomach at the time of discovery. The blood concentration of barbiturate was 4.5 milligrams per 100 milliliters, enough to cause significant sedation, but not, by itself, sufficient to cause death. She would have been deeply drowsy, disoriented, possibly unable to walk steadily, but alive. And then came the detail that made every detective in Bergen quietly certain that this was not a simple suicide. Soot particles were found deep in her respiratory tract, in her lungs. This is not a finding consistent with a body burned after death. The medical examiner's conclusion was unambiguous. The deceased was alive at the time of the fire. She burned while she was breathing. Furthermore, and the reports are clear on this, the pills found in her system were pink. Phenomal tablets sold in Norway at that time were white. Pink phenomal was sold only in England. The cause of death was listed as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire and barbiturate incapacitation from the pills. The official ruling, declared by Bergen police on December 21, 1970, was probable suicide. The case was officially closed in early 1971. Decades later, when journalists and investigators went back to the detectives who had worked the case, they found something striking. Almost none of them had believed it at the time. "We talked about it in the police," one detective told investigators, "but as far as I remember, very few thought it was suicide. I do not believe it was suicide." The forensic psychiatrist Frank Urbaniak, a leading Swiss expert, studied the case files in depth and reached his own conclusion. Suicide is very unlikely. A great deal here indicates the involvement of a third party. The question of why the case was closed so quickly, and what was known by whom, opens a door that has never been fully examined. While Bergen police were publicly wrapping up their investigation, something else was happening. The Norwegian intelligence service, the secret police, known at the time as POT, had opened their own separate investigation into the Isdal Woman. This fact was not disclosed to the public for decades. A classified file, stamped "secret" and dated December 1970, was eventually declassified and revealed that the Norwegian armed forces had been paying attention. The document contained a specific observation by the Norwegian military commander Onarheim, that the movements of the Isdal Woman, her hotel stays, her travel pattern, the cities she visited and when, corresponded with the top-secret testing program for the Penguin missile. The Penguin, Norway's domestically developed anti-ship missile, one of the first of its kind in NATO's arsenal, was being tested in the waters near Stavanger in 1969 and 1970. The trials were classified. Personnel from the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment were staying at hotels in Stavanger during these tests. The same hotels, in at least some cases, where the Isdal Woman had stayed under one of her aliases. Bergen was the location of Norway's largest naval base. In 1970, NATO exercises involving American, German, and British warships were a regular feature of Norwegian waters. Soviet submarines had been tracked in the fjords. The city, so beautiful and so seemingly removed from the machinery of global conflict, was in fact deeply embedded within it. What was she looking for? Who was she reporting to? Was she watching the missile trials? Was she watching the people watching the missile trials? These are not questions that have been answered. They are questions that remain as open today as they were 53 years ago. What makes them more unsettling is this. The Norwegian secret police were aware of espionage activity in the area. They confirmed that intelligence operatives would have been present near the naval installations. and yet the public investigation was closed quickly, with unanswered questions left hanging in the air like smoke. In 2016 and 2017, NRK, Norway's national public broadcaster, and the BBC launched a joint investigation into the case, including the landmark podcast series Death in Isdal Valley, produced by journalist Marit Hygraff and BBC reporter Neil McCarthy. The investigation was conducted with the cooperation of the Bergen police and the Norwegian Criminal Investigation Service, Kripos. What they found was not a solved case, but it was a case significantly advanced. The jaw of the Isdal woman had been preserved in a forensic archive, a detail that was not widely known. This opened the possibility of isotopic analysis, a modern forensic technique that examines the chemical signatures in tooth enamel to trace where a person grew up. Different regions have different concentrations of specific isotopes in their water and food supplies, and these signatures are absorbed into the enamel of teeth during childhood, where they remain for life. The results were described by a scientist at Kripos as much more specific than I could have dreamed of. The analysis suggested that the woman had most likely spent her childhood near the border region between France and Germany. Around the age of 14, she had probably lived in the border areas involving Germany, France, Luxembourg, and Belgium. Later analysis connected her more specifically to the region near Nuremberg, in Bavaria. She was not Scandinavian. She was probably not British. She was from Central Western Europe, from a region where French and German were both living languages, where post-war borders had been redrawn and identities scrambled by the chaos of the preceding 30 years. She had grown up in a Europe that had been remade by conflict, occupation, and ideological division. She had come of age in the exact geography where Cold War networks were dense, where recruitment into intelligence work was routine, where disappearing into a new identity was a skill some people learned out of necessity before they were adults. She was, in all probability, somewhere between 35 and 45 years old when she died. She had lived through the Second World War as a child or young teenager in a region that had experienced occupation. What that meant for who she became, what it may have required of her, or what she may have chosen, remains entirely unknown. To understand the weight of what was lost, it helps to trace the final days. She arrived in Bergen for the last time in late November 1970. She checked into Hotel Horderheimen. She was seen by staff. She was, as she had always been, quiet and controlled and slightly apart from everything around her. On November 23rd, 6 days before her body was found, hotel staff noted her presence. She had a room. She had luggage. She had somewhere a suitcase full of disguises and currencies and codes, sitting in a locker at the railway station. At some point in those 6 days, something happened, or she decided something, or something was decided for her. A taxi driver later told investigators that he believed he had driven a woman matching her description toward the Isdalen Valley. He said she had seemed distressed. His account was never formally verified. On the night of November 29th, she was found. The Isdalen Valley is approximately 3 miles from the Bergen city centre. It is beautiful country, wild and silent and removed from the city below. In November, in the dark, it is the kind of place where no one would hear anything. The loneliness of this case is its most devastatingly human quality. She traveled through Norway for weeks at a time. She ate in hotel dining rooms and walked through city streets and spoke to shop clerks and hotel maids. Real people remember her eyes, remember her bearing, remember something about her they could not quite name. And yet she passed through every one of those encounters without leaving a real trace, without being known, without being held in anyone's life as anything more than a striking stranger. She ate alone. She slept alone. She moved constantly. She maintained, through what must have been enormous psychological discipline, a state of near total anonymity in a world full of people who might have known her name. What does that cost? What does it do to a person to live that way, whatever the reason, whatever the circumstances that led there? To build a life made entirely of aliases, to carry wigs and blank-lensed glasses and currency from 4 countries, to sleep in rooms you've requested because they face the right direction, to wipe surfaces after touching them? On February 5, 1971, the Isdal Woman was buried in Bergen's Melendal Cemetery. The coffin was zinc sealed, a forensic preservation measure, in case relatives ever came forward or evidence was needed again. Bergen police attended the burial. A Catholic priest performed the service, because investigators had noted the small details in her possessions that suggested she might have been Catholic. There was no family. There were no mourners who had known her. Her grave was unmarked for years. She had no name to put on a stone. Norway, in the months and years that followed, could not quite let her go. The case became part of Bergen's identity, whispered about, speculated over, occasionally erupting back into public consciousness. Investigators who had worked the case in 1970 never stopped thinking about it. Oscar Hordens, who led the investigation, continued to carry the questions with him. His son remembers watching his father remain haunted. In 2018, the Death in Ice Valley podcast reached an international audience and generated thousands of tips from listeners across the world. The Isdal Woman became, briefly, one of the most discussed cold cases on Earth. People in France and Germany and Belgium and beyond searched their memories and their archives. New leads emerged. New witnesses came forward. A spoon found in her luggage was traced to a specific manufacturer in a specific region. None of it was enough. The case that the NRK and BBC investigation built was compelling and meticulous and deeply human. It gave her a probable region of origin. It revised her probable age. It eliminated certain theories and deepened others. And it left the core mystery exactly where it had been since 1970. Unresolved, unanswered, and unwilling to yield. In 2025, DNA analysis from the preserved tissue samples, stored for decades at Haukeland University Hospital in Bergen, samples taken from her lungs, heart, adrenal gland, and ovaries during the original autopsy, continued to be explored as a potential avenue toward identification. Modern genetic genealogy techniques that have solved other decades-old cold cases have been considered. The investigation technically remains open. There are things about this case that resist every framework. If she was a spy, she was careful enough to erase herself completely, and yet she was found. If she died by suicide, she was composed enough to take pills hours in advance, walk into a remote valley in the dark, and set herself on fire. And yet the soot in her lungs and the bruise on her neck and the nearly intact dose of barbiturate in her blood make that account deeply, structurally difficult to accept. If she was killed, then whoever did it took extraordinary care to leave nothing behind. And the case was closed within weeks, by an official investigation that some of its own members did not believe. The intelligence file that was classified. The secret police investigation that ran parallel to the public one. The speed of the official closure. These are not evidence of conspiracy, but they are facts. And they sit in the record, alongside the pink sleeping pills that could only have come from England, and the coded notepad, and the wigs, and the 8 names, and the currencies from 4 countries. She was someone. She had a childhood. She grew up near a border where 2 of the 20th century's great languages met, and where the history of that century had left deep marks on ordinary life. She learned languages. She learned discipline. She learned, somehow, to travel through the world almost without friction, almost without being real. And then one November in a valley outside Bergen, whatever had kept her hidden and moving and alive, stopped. The Isdal Woman lies in Bergen's Melendal Cemetery. Her grave now has a marker, placed there by people who felt the weight of her anonymity and wanted to do something, however small, to push back against it. The marker does not bear a name, because no name has been confirmed. It bears the date of her discovery and the place. Isdalen, 1970. There are people in Bergen who visit the grave. Investigators who worked the case and are now old men. Journalists who spent years trying to find her name. Strangers who learned about her from a podcast or an article or a documentary and felt, as so many people feel, something that goes beyond curiosity into something harder to name. She was real. She walked through streets that still exist. She sat in hotel rooms that may still be rented to travelers. She rode trains through a Norway that has changed enormously since her death, and, in its mountains and its valleys and its fjords, has not changed at all. Who wanted her erased? Who succeeded? Was it a state, protecting something it could not acknowledge? Was it a network, disposing of someone who had become a liability? Was it, in the end, her own choice, made in circumstances so particular and so trapped that we could not understand them even if she could have explained them? Or is there a simpler truth somewhere, a woman with a private tragedy and a private reason, who chose to disappear in the most permanent way available to her, and whose meticulous self-erasure in life made her erasure in death feel like something much larger than it was? We don't know. We genuinely do not know. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling truth of all. In a world where surveillance has become total, where digital records reach back decades, where forensic science can read a person's childhood in their teeth, this woman, from this valley, in this year, remains unidentified. Someone knew her name. Someone is still not saying it. The ice valley is quiet. The fog is still there, collecting between the mountains, the way it always has. The body is gone, but the questions are not. They are still up there among the rocks, waiting in the cold and the dark, patient as something that has learned it can afford to wait. Her name was never found, and the valley keeps its silence.